Yeah,
Yeah,
welcome
yeah,
to the Vanguard podcast, Salem Snow. Thanks so much for joining us today. Just to give a little background for listeners, you actually ran for Congress to represent Pennsylvania's second district as a Rose Caucus socialist candidate, running with the Democratic Party, though, if I'm correct.
correct.
Okay, and yeah, do you just want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about how living where you do in Philadelphia has impacted your politics?
Yeah, for sure. So I ran for Pennsylvania's second congressional district, which is the poorest district in the state. It's also disproportionately impacted by pretty much every topic in the national discussion: homelessness, underinsured, uninsured, the opioid epidemic, just everything down the line. And me growing up from a background of like extreme poverty probably significantly shaped my politics over time, especially living in one of the poorest areas in the state, because everybody you see inside your community is impacted by something. Either they have family or friends that have been impacted by the opioid epidemic, which goes beyond just impacting the victims, but also the victims' families and local communities. Um, and you just kind of see like everybody struggling and not having the resources that they need just to survive. And I think that really like leaves a lasting impact on people, or it did for me at least, because me like making the move as like when I was younger, I was like a liberal Obama supporter, and I think the longer you live in these conditions, the more you kind of see the inadequacies of policy, the failures in the system, and you kind of like live that. So making the jump from being like a progressive liberal to a socialist was really easy and natural for me. It just came very naturally, the transition. But yeah, I think that the climate in this district, as well as other impoverished areas, has really brought about like a large progressive movement of people who not just want change, but very desperately need it.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of us can really relate to. Starting out as being kind of inspired by Obama's presidency, his win in 2008, and kind of thinking that the system could be saved from within. And then obviously when Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, naively thinking that Bernie could continue on the legacy of Obama, but do it with a serious progressive platform and less corruption, yada yada. Of course, we've all been kind of radicalized when that didn't turn out, when that didn't pan out, and now we're stuck where we are with we had Hillary in 2016, now we have Joe Biden. Can you just speak to a little bit more about your transition from being kind of an Obama liberal, like you said, to, an unapologetic socialist candidate, the man you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I think from a teenager, just being LGBTQ kind of at an early age often kind of shifts you towards like the liberal side of things, even if you're not particularly political. Um, so I think I I did do like some um, a little volunteering for Obama when I was in college, but I still wasn't like super like politically aware. Um, it was just kind of in line with liberal politics, and it was like kind of like the thing to do at the time. Um, but I think the Occupy movement that took place, post 2008, is what really started like radicalizing me really quickly. Because 2008, impacted me and lots of other people across the country in a very serious and personal way. We kind of saw over the years from 2008 to 2011 especially, and after that we saw that the money we were making was not going as far. We weren't really making as much. Costs were going up, and I think that with the Occupy movement, I remember my first protest actually was an Occupy protest in Raleigh, North Carolina, um, and that was in 2011. And I remember like going to that protest, and I went by myself because I didn't have any roommates or friends, and it was just like an off day at the time. And I was like, like I'm just gonna go. So I went, and a protest, I feel like, is a really powerful experience in itself. Going out with like-minded people, supporting a cause, like bringing your cause to the streets. And it kind of resonated with me seeing all these other, especially young folks that were like, hey, like we're severely impacted by this. You know, there's tons of foreclosures going on. The middle class was quickly shrinking. And I think that the Occupy movement was like the beginning of me getting seriously political. And I think that that's what started shifting me very quickly from being a run-of-the-mill typical liberal to more towards socialist policies. I remember my brother introduced me to Sanders because he was like, I'll say like a woke leftist before I was. And he was like, hey, there's this guy in the Senate named Bernie Sanders, and I think you should check him out. And I was like, okay. And I was just kind of like really apprehensive of politicians, especially after Obama. So I was like, okay. But I started looking into him, and I was like, dude, this is like one of the few people in Congress that like kind of gets it. In more recent years, especially since he ran in 2016, I've noticed more differences a little bit in like my ideas versus Bernie's, but I still think he was like the closest thing to acceptable that we had. But yeah, I think the move from liberalism to socialism was really, it went from like the Occupy movement and then just kind of like transcended from there into like drifting in that direction over like the following years, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about your experiences campaigning during your time that you were running for Congress. What was the reception like from people in your district and, you know, the people that you've grown up around when you bring up these policies like Medicare for all, like, you know, raising the minimum wage, you know, to now policies like, you know, defunding the police, abolishing the police, you know, what's the reception to things like that? You mentioned that these are people that are dealing with, you know, a multitude of constant grievances, you know, shortcomings from this, you know, systemic failures. You know, obviously the police are a constant presence in your community and somebody that these people interact with. You know, what has their response been to that?
So our district is really interesting. First, in that we have a shitload of independents. There's a ton of independents here. And over the past couple of years, what I've kind of learned is that these independents are not centrist independents, which is what, you know, like the American establishment likes for everybody to believe. Mm-hmm. Like independents are between Democrats and Republicans, and I don't think that's true at all. And here we have independents that are left of the Democratic Party, and they are so left to the point that they don't want to be part of that, which I understand. There's, you know, we've had a lot of problems in the Democratic Party. But the district is really interesting because the southern parts of the district are like super impoverished. And these are the parts that people experience like the most oppression. And towards the top of the district, where the incumbent currently lives, is like a small subset of neighborhoods that are like really, really well off. So up there, it's a little bit more conservative, and there tends to be more conservative Democrats towards the top. But overall, the district is pretty pro-working class. Even those that don't particularly consider themselves political are pretty pro-working class. There's also there's a lot of Green Party presence here. This is one of their like strongholds, I'd say. And we also have a PSL, which is like a Marxist-Leninist party that's right up the street from my neighborhood. And they're like really, really active in the district. They always keep things, they stay visible. And they do a lot of like, there's a lot of organizations here, a lot of nonprofits, and they all kind of work together on these things. So it's a very politically active district, and it's already like very progressive innately. So the reception to most of the policies was like really, really well taken. Even some of them that I would consider like more radical for some areas, like abolishing the CIA, which was part of the platform I ran on.
Yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that in a little bit more detail. You've ran on abolishing the CIA, NSA, DHS, IMF, World Bank. It was a laundry list. We definitely want to get into that with you.
Yeah, for sure. people they responded a lot better to that than I expected, because I was unsure about that one. I was like, like, I'm not really sure what the general take of the public is on this, but like, instead of like trying to feel it out and like, pander to people, I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna say what I think. Like, this is what I think. Like,
Yeah.
but there was actually like surprising, when I was getting signatures to get on the ballot, there was some people that would like show up. Like, I would just post and be like, I'm here getting signatures, and people would like, show up, and they would be like, dude, I'm so down with you abolishing the CIA. Like, that's the coolest like policy ever. And I'm like, okay, like, this is a really good response. Like, this is good. So yeah, like, a lot of people were really open to it. I think the one that some people were a little apprehensive about, they were like, you're talking about like abolishing the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm like, okay, like, that sounds way scarier than it actually is. Like, those are programs that were put up by Bush. Like, we went so long without those programs beforehand. We were fine beforehand. Like, we don't need these overly funded, like, really aggressive. And honestly, like, they don't even work. Like, they don't really stop very much from happening. They don't really catch like hardly anything. It's like,
It's not like we've had any mass shootings in our country since the Homeland Security started working. Doesn't seem like there's been any terrorism domestically.
Oh yeah, right.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, in my opinion, yeah, you had just about one of the dopest platforms I've ever seen a congressional candidate, run on, really covering the whole gauntlet of issues and, striking just such a aggressive and unapologetically left stance on these issues. And I mean, that makes sense that if your district is very independent heavy, has a lot of more socialist leaning types, that, yeah, it's really cool that you were able to kind of run on those unabashed policies. And you're totally right. Similarly to ICE, there was a program that was created in, I think, the mid 2000s. And it's not like, we had any major massive issues before, and it's not like it's really solved anything. So I totally agree that, I mean, might as well run unabashed on these things if you're able to talk to people and explain that. Something else I wanted to talk to you about was something that you've asserted on Twitter, actually your pinned tweet, is that there's a lot of snakes riding this leftist wave. Something you say you've learned and experienced during your run for office. I mean, this is something that's been concerning me too, and kind of pisses me off that I see all the time. Democrats like Elizabeth Warren claiming to represent the progressive movement while basically selling it out constantly behind the scenes. Endorsing Frackenlooper over the Andrew Romanoff, who had a real chance in Colorado. I thought. Stuff like that. Can you tell us more about your experience with this kind of deception? Mainstream Democrats pretending to be progressives, and how it impacted your own candidacy?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So I will say that my political views as a socialist are pretty much like the same before I ran as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
I think largely what changed was the way that I viewed other organizations and progressive darlings in politics. Because one thing, I used to just kind of have this idea, right, that like the establishment is a bunch of like old boomers that won't let go of their power and don't get out of the way, and like they're fucking us all over. And like, that's kind of true. It's just like, it's not that simple. And I learned like there's a lot that goes on behind what I call the political curtain, because what politicians and organizations show you publicly is exactly what they want to show you publicly. They say exactly what they think needs to be said. They like, everything's like a plan and an agenda, and like they say all the right things, which is why I'm like really adamant about like, do not listen to anything any politician tells you, any of them, no matter how much you like them. Don't listen to me. Fuck me. Like, look at what people do. Look at what they do. Look at what they vote on. Look at the legislation they try to pass. Look at who they endorse. Look at, the type of work they do. Are they doing work in the community? Are they trying to benefit people around them? Like, because I learned that a lot of politicians that I really, really liked for a long time, I hated once I figured out what they were doing. I was like, dude, like, this is not what I thought you were at all. And it's just a completely different world, like, kind of as a candidate and being involved with these people and organizations. Like, there's plenty of like brand name organizations that like have chapters that are just like problematic as hell, or like their actual like dark money entities that are masquerading as grassroots progressive like organizations. It's crazy the extent that these people go to try to manipulate the progressive vote, because that's what it all is. If they can put in somebody that looks progressive, then the progressives will be like, oh yeah, like I totally agree with all these policies, so I'm going to like vote for them. And they never notice that their funding is like dark money, Goldman Sachs, etc. So it's kind of crazy. It made me a little pessimistic at first, seeing how many organizations kind of like are trying to ride the progressive wave. And I don't know, I guess I've become like a lot more careful and also cynical about politicians, if that's even possible to get any more cynical. But yeah.
Somehow they managed to make us. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is kind of like the barriers for being a regular working class guy running for Congress. I mean, we saw recently even Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, tried to run as a Green Party candidate in New Jersey on a bold, green socialist platform, but was unable to because of health insurance. Jesse Ventura was going to run, contemplating publicly running for president, but he was unable to because his wife has severe medical needs, and he can't lose his also RT platform. Funny how RT is the only place that ever platforms leftists, but he was also unable to leave because of his medical ties and his need for insurance. I just wondered if you could talk about how this kind of undermines a true democracy in our system, and how hard it is to run as a non-sponsored candidate.
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed was, so I've been like an activist in Philly for years. And there was a lot of, there's like a lot of nonprofit work and stuff like that. So like I was, it's not that I wouldn't say I was politically connected before I ran, but I was connected locally among like other activists. And I think that the first thing I noticed when I started running was how many people did not want me to be there. And Republicans and conservatives are not a thing in this district. They don't win ever. Like, it's the Democrat walks. If you win the primary, you got the general. Like, that's just how it works here. And it was just crazy how like elitist Democrats were like my biggest obstacle. Like, people in my own party, and I've been a Democrat for years, which is pretty unpopular among like a lot of leftist circles, and I totally get that. And it was just kind of like, it felt like I was being stabbed in the back, because like, despite the fact that there's so much corruption in the Democratic Party, there's so much dark money, corporate money, like so many bad things happening. Like, I'm like, no, like I'm gonna stay here with other people and try to reform this, specifically because like I think it's like 80% of Democrats like identify better with socialism than capitalism. So like, it's not really a matter of the voters not having a party. It's the fact that the Democratic politicians aren't accurately representing the voters. So going into that, like, they were my biggest obstacle, was other Democrats the whole time. And like, they were constantly like trying to keep me from like going forward. Like, I've never seen somebody work so hard to like oust a campaign that's a long shot to begin with. Yeah. Other than Sanders, but that was like a whole presidency thing, and they were trying to like thwart him at every turn. It felt like that in a lot of ways, because some of the people that were trying actively to make sure my opponent won were like, some of them were leadership of Philly DSA. And I'm like, why the hell are you like supporting a corporate incumbent Democrat? Like, that's wild to me. But it's a lot of like, there's a lot of elitism still in the Democratic Party, and there's a lot of people that don't want working class people there. And I think that they actually like set this kind of idea that, well, you need this classist qualification, you need this classist qualification to be like a serious candidate sort of thing. And like, they kind of put this idea in people's heads that like working class people aren't qualified to run for office. Yep. And they kind of perpetuate that without saying it, because, they don't want to look bad. But that's what they do. And it's crazy the number of barriers. Like, for example, like even just filing paperwork is ridiculously expensive. Like, just to like be a candidate, get on the ballot. some states it's worse than others. Like I know one of my comrades in the Rose Caucus needed to hit like a $10,000 filing fee, which is like crazy because what working class person has $10,000 to throw out the window?
Yeah.
Like,
well,
Yeah, we talked to Lisa Savage, a Green Party candidate in Maine, also about some of the ridiculous qualifications that you have to try and become a candidate on the ballot. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
it's crazy. And it's like, there's all these like classist laws and barriers and stuff. And it's just like, dude, like this system is not set up for working class people to win. And it's intentionally set up that way. And occasionally, you know, you'll see leftists like fall through the cracks and get into office. But of course, that's not without, you know, the party or others like making it their life mission to get them out.
And it seems like they've doubled down on that since AOC managed to make it through in 2018. I mean, if you, without the $40 million that got pumped into Kentucky, 98% of which from out of state, we would have, you know, Charles Booker on his way to unseating Mitch McConnell, the literal goblin king of the Senate.
Exactly.
yeah. Well,
I mean,
no, sorry. You're
go ahead, Gavin.
I was just going to say it's really ironic what you were saying about the classism in the Democratic Party and how they're, you know, working to sabotage working class people because your opponent in the primary and the incumbent Democratic representative of your district is Brendan Boyle, and he's actually the co-creator of the Blue Collar Caucus that has the stated goal of reconnecting Democrats with working class Americans over issues like outsourcing and manufacturing. So I don't really understand what your beef is with the guy. He seems like he's really into, you know, connecting with the working class. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. So Brendan Boyle is he's one of those problematic Democrats that does an excellent job at looking progressive. He's an excellent public speaker.
Mm-hmm.
He knows how to hop on all the right progressive waves at the right time. Like he definitely knows what he's doing politically. He knows like political maneuvers and stuff like that, which, you know, working class people don't really know about because we don't really have the time to sit around scheming how we're going to like outmaneuver people socially because that's weird. But yeah, so he's one of them people that like says the right things, but his funding comes from like any and every corporation ever. And like he's in with Verizon, you know, Goldman Sachs. I can't even think of how many there are. I have a whole list somewhere. But sorry, that was my cat. So yeah, like and it's just one of those things that like a lot of Democratic politicians do. They say a lot of the right things. They even show up at some of the right things. Like Brendan Boyle was even like at one point like going to be a speaker at an Our Revolution event, which was just like wild to me because I was like, who's checking backgrounds here? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
But it's crazy how many Democrats like coast by on like having a decent name and a decent record because they say the right things, and they just do completely different things. Like Boyle, for example, voted for the bill that he was against the Iran nuclear deal. He voted for the Space Force bill, which I just thought was like wild because I'm pretty sure he was slamming him for that on Twitter. And I was like, dude, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they're very good at like setting themselves up to look progressive and act like they're intact, like being attacked when they get challenged. But it's kind of like political gaslighting for politicians, I guess.
Sounds like somebody else we might know who's running for president. I wondered what your thoughts were on the kind of current predicament that the left find themselves in. You know, before the protests erupted after the, you know, cold-blooded killing of George Floyd in broad daylight, and the demand for justice, you know, flooded the streets of our country from coast to coast. You know, I had kind of been of the opinion that, you know, Donald Trump's rhetoric had been obscene, of course, and deplorable, but his actions had been no more deranged and harmful than somebody like George Bush or even somebody like Ted Cruz had they gotten into office. It was only recently when he, you know, started using chemical warfare against citizens of the country peacefully demonstrating and threatening to, you know, deploy troops on our streets to disperse protesters that were exercising their First Amendment rights. that I, really started to weigh the, okay, maybe Biden is the only option here. However, when you sign off on Joe Biden, you're signing off on a host of other baggage of, deplorable characteristics, bad votes, bad intentions looking forward with things like foreign policy across the board, whether that's with Iran or Israel in Palestine. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on the election coming up.
Oh, man. Okay. So I have been a very loud critic of Biden since Biden has existed. Okay, so first I'm going to say that I don't know that there are any good electoral options or like ways to vote this cycle, at least in terms of the presidency. Because I hear a lot of leftists in my community be like, I'm absolutely not voting for Joe Biden. And they can give you a list of, like 50 reasons why he's terrible. And I completely agree with every single one of those reasons. And then on the other side of that, you kind of have people saying like, this is about damage mitigation and we want to mitigate the damage. So we're going to vote for Biden. And I am still an undecided voter because I can't really see myself supporting Biden unless like I knew that whatever Trump did in his next term was going to be so bad that like Biden would have been better, which I can't even imagine how that would happen because Biden's history is very much in line with Trump's politics. And his foreign policy could even arguably, be worse considering how many decades he's spent, with his hands in foreign policy versus one term of Trump. But electorally, I'm just not sure that there's going to be a good option. And while some of the concessions that Biden is making to the left, which are a joke to me, and I think are an insult to most leftists, for example,
you didn't hear that he's going to reduce the qualified age for Medicare about to what, 55?
Yeah, 60? Right? Like
60, sorry, not 55 was Clinton. Yeah, he's only doing it to 60. That's my bad.
Dude, right? Like we literally took a centrist Democrat that lost, and then we were like, okay, what can we learn from this? All right, let's run somebody to the right. And so they run Biden, who's like objectively worse. It's just crazy.
But they're going to learn the Bill Clinton lesson again, though. That's what I'm worried about, right? See, the exact thing that happened when Bill Clinton won in the 90s was because Ross Perot ran. And then the Democrats have this idea that the only way that you can win is to have these hardline, ridiculous neoliberal policies.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's almost like, while Biden may be better than Trump, it's almost like voting for him. In voting for him, we're allowing the Overton window to be moved that far right. It's saying that it's okay that a Democratic nominee is not even a Democrat. He's really a Republican. By voting for Joe Biden, we're almost accepting that reality, and that's what I'm really having the most difficulty coming to terms with, is just allowing the Democratic Party to prop up this guy, and just like they did in 2016, someone who's not really aligned with the politics of the left at all.
It's really interesting how many Democrats I meet that are not fond of Biden, and it's a similar thing to what happened in the primaries in 2016. Like it's an anecdote, but I didn't meet anyone that was thrilled about Hillary, and I haven't met anyone that's thrilled about Joe. Like, it seems like there are specific people at the top who are placing people exactly who they want, where they want, and disregarding the complete will of the voters in the party, which is, basically what American politics has become with the higher offices. Like, I don't understand why we always have to have, like, the damage mitigation vote. Like,
the Faustian vote.
Yeah, always. Like, why can't we ever just run a progressive? Like, the one time in recent modern history that we ever like ran a progressive in the general was Obama, and he turned out to be not so progressive, but he won.
Yeah. And also just seeing the Democrats intentionally sabotage Bernie time and time again. Not even the Republicans got together and unified behind, Marco Rubio or whatever in an attempt to stop Donald Trump, in the same way that Obama, from reportedly masterminded the unification behind Joe Biden. So it's like, and not to mention the super delegates in 2016 and how they were threatening to, use them again if Bernie didn't get a plurality.
When
of
Bernie
votes.
was the only one on the debate
Yeah.
stage that said that he supported democracy in the primary.
In all honesty, in some ways, the Republican Party is a more democratic institution when it comes to at least letting their voters decide who they want to be the nominee without constantly pressing their thumb on the scale and getting involved. It's really dirty, and especially I always just think it's hilarious that they call themselves the Democratic Party when all this anti-democratic nonsense is going on behind the scenes. And yeah, ultimately, it's just like, for me, voting for Biden, it really is endorsing that evil as well, which is why I struggle to. It's like after everything they've done to the progressive movement, just rolling over and saying, okay, I'll vote for you anyway. It just seems wrong and undoable in my opinion. But I obviously understand the rationale of those who have decided to do it.
Yeah, ultimately, like, I think this is one of those elections where I'm just not going to hold anything against anybody because I don't know that there's any good moves. Like, if somebody wants to vote third party, like, I'm all for that. I've always supported third parties, like, even as a Democrat, because I think we should be democratic and have multiple parties. But
yeah, the Democrats are truly unique in their hatred for their disdain for third parties. If you look at it, like the Republicans were really the party that lost an election because of a third party. Ross Perot stole the election stole, if we want to use their terminology, the election from George Sr. That is the biggest third party poll in modern U.S. politics. So I think to have this like obscene phobia of third parties because Ralph Nader got like 3% of the vote 20 years ago, it's absurd. But they clamor. They were freaking out when Justin Amash, a fucking libertarian conservative, like, it's ridiculous.
It's crazy. Like, and you would think that like anyone who supported like the democratic process or democracy in general would be in favor of multiple parties, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know any people who are like thrilled about us having a two-party system. Like, it's a giant flaw that's like designed for us to fail.
Yeah, totally. Well, Salem, do you have any more plans for the future? Are you planning on running again for your district maybe next time around?
So I've been asked that. I don't really have my sights on anything that far. Maybe I should. Right now I've just been working with the local organizations. Like we're doing food delivery for like high risk folks, low income people, stuff like that. So mostly right now I've tried to focus on local activism and less on electoral politics, just because the cycle is extraordinarily depressing. So, I mean, as a socialist, I think one of the best things we can do is, keep our feet on the ground and keep things rolling, keep taking care of our own and letting other people see that, we're taking care of communities, not like the politicians. So I don't know. I might run maybe again. I guess we'll see what happens. But right now I'm just focused on nonprofit work.
Awesome. Well, we definitely look forward to seeing what you decide to do next, and thank you for the work that you've done for, the leftist cause. And yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah, dude. We hope you have a good one, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me so much.
Yeah, we really enjoyed
Have a good one,
talking.
man.
All right, take care.